I'm Tarcisio. I'm from the Swiss Institute of Bioinformatics. I'm here today to talk about our work federating and queuing heterogeneous and distributed web APIs and triple stores. This work was done in collaboration with the BSF company. It's a lead company in the crop protection industry. First, I would like to start with a motivation example. This question was done by a BSF researcher that was studying the ONT2 gene in wheat and wanted to know the protein-protein interaction of its autologs in rice. To answer this kind of complex biological question, we often need to combine the scattered data at BSF and also watching on the web. For example, here, we could think about to get the information about the protein-protein interaction from the string database, a public database. And for the ontology data, we could think about the OMA database. Also, it is a public database, but at BSF, we also have a proprietary version of the data there for having the ontology information. Then, by doing that, we can derive new insights from this web of biological data that is at BSF and also available on the web. Before starting presenting our approach, I would like to mention two different categories of data integration interoperability approach that exist along with a brief literature review. In summary, you can divide it into two categories: decentralized approach for data integration and decentralized ones. For example, for centralized ones, we can mention Intermine. That's a data warehouse approach for integrating biological data from multiple sources. Similarly, we can also highlight Wikidata. That is also a centralized approach, but where the public can contribute by creating bots or manually feeding the data into Wikidata. If for the bots also they have to have authorization and so on, but is it also possible for the public to contribute? The Wikidata actually is being consolidated a knowledge graph for the life science. Nevertheless, in general, centralized approach requires more maintenance efforts and also complicates the integration of new data sources that, for example, requires new concepts or attributes to be added that we would require also changing the data scheme and re-engineering that can be complicated for centralized data sources such as Wikidata that not only handles life science domain, but also other knowledge domains. Alternatively, we have to address these issues decentralizing methods, such as the Sparkle microservices that make web API functions queryable with a Sparkle query language. This way, we homogenize the way that we query these different web APIs and also potentially making possible the semantic interoperability among these different web APIs. Then, in our case, actually, we rely on the Sparkle microservice in our data integration architecture, as I will present in my next slides. But also before, I would like to mention how is the current situation at BSF. The data there is quite fragmented and the access modes are heterogeneous. Data has different heterogeneities in different levels, at the syntactical level and also at semantical level. In this work, we focus on the integration and interoperability of web APIs with the native RDF store that can be accessed through query language such as Sparkle. For the web APIs, why we are more interested also in interpreting these web APIs is because they not necessarily only provide access to the raw data, but often to the processed data. That it will be difficult to have this information if you aim it to integrate it at the raw data level, the data source level. Then it's more interesting to interpret the web API because you have access to the processed data. That at the end of the day, it's also something that has more interest for the end users. They're looking for this processed information. And then also they have other kind of ways to access the data, programming language specific API at BSF, and also other kind of data stores such as a graph database called Neo4j. Then what we do to achieve data integration interoperability at BSF? We do that integration actually on the fly. It's a kind of a seamless data integration that data is retrieved directly from the original sources via the web APIs, since we focus on the web APIs. Then they are combined using virtual knowledge graph during the query execution time. Essentially, these web APIs are exposed as a knowledge graph virtually that they can then be queryable with structured query language for RDF, in this case, the Sparkle query language. And it means that we homogenize the way that the data is accessed and also syntactically how it's represented. And by using ontologies, as I will show afterwards, we also address some semantic interoperability heterogeneous issues, actually. Then by doing that, essentially, we keep the data always up to date because the data provides continue to handle the own data sources, actually. And also we reduce the maintenance because there is no central unit to maintain. The responsibility is kept through the data producer, actually. Therefore, we apply a decentralized approach. Then I will show briefly how it is the data integration, the federated data integration architecture that we developed. Essentially, we have this application layer that can be a keyword search engine such as Biosoda that can be built over the integrated data sources. The integration indeed happens through the structured query interface layer that contains the different Sparkle endpoints of the different sources. It's here that the way that you access the data is homogenized and also where the data is combined at query execution time. For example, in the last layer is the data store layer that, for example, we have here the OMA RDF store. It's a native RDF store that has a Sparkle endpoint associated to it to access the data, and this is represented using the ontology from the Quest for Autonomous Consortium. The string database, I will talk a little bit more in details in a few, and also we have other data store that were integrated, such as the SEC repo. It's a repository that contains metadata about sequences. That's also providing web APIs, and we are applying the same method that we apply for StringDB, but for the SEC repo. So if I give a zoom in the StringDB case, essentially for each web API developed over the string database, they have, for example, a function called get functional interaction network. We then make the results that's retrieved by calling this function as a virtual knowledge graph. It's represented using the ontology that we developed for structuring the protein-protein interaction knowledge from the string database specifically, but it can further be extended and adapted to other protein-protein databases. And essentially for each web API function, we're going to have a corresponding Sparkle endpoint, in this case for the functional interaction API, we're going to have this endpoint, and for the physical interaction as well, we're going to have another one. Then we use these technologies here to implement our approach. Here you can see it's publicly available, the specification of the protein-protein ontology that we developed for the string database for the web API responses. And finally, to give you a little bit more specificity about how the things is mapped, actually, how the JSON response are mapped into a knowledge graph. Essentially, we use the Sparkle query language, more specifically the construct query syntax from the Sparkle query language. And then by using that, we define these maps. For example, here, we're going to have the attribute in the JSON response called stable address from the function version, the REST API version from the string database that that has the value of the representation of the versioning URL of the string database will be mapped as a value of the has version property that's come from the DC terms vocabulary. And then we do this exercise further to all web APIs provided by string database. Then essentially, if I come back to the question that we have in the beginning of the presentation, the answer of these questions is illustrated here, where we have the ortholog, the OMT2 genes, the COMT gene, its functional product, the protein, interacts with other 10 proteins according to the string database. Then I will focus on this question. This is the question 8 of our evaluation. We can see that the mean time for retrieving the results was around 1 second for retrieving 10 results. For further evaluation information, you can visit this website. That is a persistent URL. As to conclude, this work actually, we built a semantically enriched abstract layer by using the virtual knowledge graph on top of the web API functions, and by doing that, we provide access to the physical layer, the original data sources. We federated these different data sources by also showing a prototype that interoperates the web API with the native RDF stores. In our example, between OMA and the string database. As future work, we think about doing actually a comparison between the Spark microservice approach and other conventional and non-conventional ontology-based data access approach over web APIs such as Startup. And also, we think that some improvements needed for the federated tools for enabling better usability, data source discovery and query plan definition for solving performance issues of applying a federated approach. And for example, also by indexing and caching capabilities. This is the GitHub of approach, and thank you for your attention.